I think most people believe that the traditional way of managing people, which is rewards and incentives and penalties, is a right way, and people will respond to rewards. It's a very limiting view of human beings. I think we don't respond, and actually most of these rewards and incentives lead to the opposite of the intended behavior. It leads to unintended consequences. I'll give you an example. The British government, sometime in the 1800s, introduced incentive for catching cobras because they saw there was a very large population of cobras in Delhi. So they said, why don't you catch cobras? And then for every cobra that you bring dead, we will give you something. And because of that, people started breeding cobras because now they want to catch it and make money.
Hey Srikanth, thank you for agreeing to do this. Really looking forward to the chat.
Thank you, Aviral and Mazin. Great to be here.
Awesome. I think we started with this question recently, and it's given some very interesting answers. What's one truth that you believe in which very few people agree with you on?
Look, I think as a part of being a leader or doing something new is that you tend to hold a lot of opinions and interesting ideas that are not yet mainstream. So I've got a bunch of ideas that are probably not mainstream yet, but let me offer you a couple of them. The first thing I'll say is I think most people believe that the traditional way of managing people, which is rewards and incentives and penalties, is a right way, and people will respond to rewards. It's a very limiting view of human beings. I think we don't respond, and actually most of these rewards and incentives lead to the opposite of the intended behavior. It leads to unintended consequences. I'll give you an example. The British government, sometime in the 1800s, introduced incentive for catching cobras because they saw there was a very large population of cobras in Delhi. So they said, why don't you catch cobras? And then for every cobra that you bring dead, we will give you something. And because of that, people started breeding cobras because now they want to catch it and make money. The same thing happened in Hanoi in Vietnam, where they had an incentive for catching rats. They had to cut the rat's tail and bring the tail. So they started breeding rats. First of all, they would catch the rat, cut the tail, and leave the rat so that it can go breed more rats, and then they would just get the tails. So it leads to unintended consequences. I think people don't realize we take a very naive approach to incentives. That's my first thing I believe in. I think it's probably understood now, somewhat well understood now. The second one I feel is, if you look back, let's say 50 years from now, you would feel that we were very cruel. The human race has been a very cruel race to animals. We just don't, the industrial farming that we have started in the last 100 years, it leads to treating of these very sentient beings in a very inhumane way. So I do believe in treating animals well, and that these animals do understand, have feelings, and we can't eat them indiscriminately, nor can we treat them the way we currently treating. I don't think it's a very popular view, but I do believe in that.
No, absolutely makes sense. I think both are very interesting. On the incentives part, I don't think we've really figured out what really makes human beings tick, and probably it's not just money and those related incentives. I even think about organizations themselves being 200 or 300 years old. Before that, it was just everyone was an entrepreneur in some way. So the whole art of running a company itself is so young versus how old we are as a race. I think that does make sense, and there's a lot we figured out. I do appreciate the second one as well. I think not a lot of people believe in it or do it, and I do think that there are like lots of statistics on this. I was seeing the size of a chicken that's grown and the meat that's taken. It's changed a lot. The way they're treated has changed a lot. So I do think that's a very different view from what.
There are 70 billion livestock produced every year. So 10
Right.
for every human being.
Right.
So, and we eat all of them. So it's
Right.
and these are produced as units of production.
Right.
We don't consider that they have any
Treat them
feelings.
as beings.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it may be a bit much to extend it, but somehow I feel like we have the tendency to convert everything at scale to data and not really look at what's going on behind it. And it's not only restricted to animals, it can also be people, right? I think this was a quote by Stalin that a death of two people is a tragedy, but the death of a million is a statistic. So I think that that's true. And I know we are going to talk about a data company, but I feel like we lose the emotion that's associated with data. So thank you for sharing that. Um, Another question, which is more about you. What are like one or two things that you really enjoy that maybe other people don't know about, and why it helps you?
One of them is I'm a big sucker for knowledge, and
Hmm.
given the kind of world we live in, where knowledge is changing so rapidly, we believe that half life of knowledge is 3 years or less.
Right,
So
right.
it's not about the knowledge that you acquire during college years, etc., but it's the knowledge that you continuously acquire and how you learn new stuff. So I love to learn. So I teach. I read more than 100 books a year,
Wow,
and I try to get whatever time I
insane.
can to get a little better. So that's something that I believe keeps me honest, keeps me humble, and also lets me know what I don't know, and also makes me a better leader.
No, that's awesome. I think you mentioned a very interesting point, which is the half life of knowledge. I've actually never thought of knowledge in that way. I think a lot of things, especially related to technology, are updated at that velocity. Maybe things about us as a species or a race are have a longer half life. You could probably read something that Aristotle wrote, or the philosophers like Aurelius wrote thousands of years ago. They still hold true. But I think any information about a phone will change in 3 years. So I think it's a very interesting way of looking at knowledge. It's a good segue into what you've built and what you've been creating over the last couple of decades now. Would love to start with your journey. You went to amazing colleges. Obviously, the path till then was something everyone aspires to do. It's also socially acceptable. I call this a socially acceptable career. A lot of people accept it as good, but then after that, some things change for you. So, would love to walk through that. What was the journey before Fractal? Where did it actually start?
Yeah, I started just like most other people, wanting to have a safe career, so to speak. I
Right,
was very interested in mathematics throughout my childhood. And, I
right.
grew up in a household where getting 99 on a math test was seen as underperformance. So I always wanted to do well in math. And I found that I actually had some aptitude in math. So
Hmm.
I naturally thought, where can math be applied? And engineering sort of seemed as the best option. And I was also very interested in the exams, the entrance exams and so on. So I did my engineering. And similarly, I wanted to do an MBA because, again, I love the test, the admission tests on that. So
Right.
not really, I
Love the
didn't know.
test. I relate to that, by the way. I know what you mean. I love tests.
Exactly. I was that kind of guy, and
Yeah.
I never wanted to be an entrepreneur because that was
Hmm.
not the most, let's say, fashionable path in any case. And
Exactly. Correct.
my parents sort of instilled in me this thing that there is no such thing as an honest businessman. My dad used to say
Oh.
honest businessman is an oxymoron. So and I grew up in the 70s and 80s, right? So
Right.
this was mostly true. I have to frankly say that probably it's still true, but
Hmm.
I grew up with that notion, and then so I thought, I can do well academically. I can go and find a job, and I will work for probably MNCs and work for the rest of my life. And then during my MBA days, I came across this company called Infosys, and which was kind of seen as an interesting company. It had just gone public. Issue hadn't gone
Right.
well, but I did some of the research on that company because I was doing my summer internship at an investment bank, and there I saw the research report of ICICI Securities. So on I say on Infosys, and I really liked the company. And then coincidentally, in my next term, I met with Dr. Deepthi Bhatnagar, who used to offer a course called Business Ethics. And in that, she
Hmm.
invited Narayan Murthy to come and speak with us. And he came and spoke about how he built Infosys on values and powered by intellect, driven by values. That was a sort of a catch line for Infosys back then. And I was quite taken in with his, very great humility. He was very down to earth, and Infosys was literally a $50 million company, a $50 to $100 million company. It was not
Wow.
your unicorn or anything like that. It was a very tiny
Right.
company, but it seemed like this company is going to go places, and that also told me that maybe the time to believe that honest businessman is an oxymoron is gone. We are in a new era. And I also saw around the .com time, friends of mine, peers of mine, raising money and starting the first set of VC funded companies. So the
Hmm.
second assumption in my head always was that you need capital to create wealth, and I didn't have that. So with this, I felt like maybe some of the assumptions under which I was thinking of doing a job for the rest of my life, they are gone. And suddenly one fine day, I just decided to hang up my boots and become an entrepreneur. And I've not regretted that decision, though it's not been easy. But I've really
Right.
enjoyed being an entrepreneur.
And what was the trigger? So I think, you explained the background of why it seemed like really a crazy thing to do. But what made you take the leap? And why we're double clicking on this question is a lot of people are never able to take the leap. So what nudged you, or how did that happen? What pulled the trigger for you?
I think the thing that pulled the trigger for me is to see that people like me, no smarter than me, uh, are able to take that leap. And frankly, very
Understand.
early stage of your career, there's not a lot you have to lose. And
Right.
it felt like it was a very low risk decision to not have attempted. One of the things that Jeff Bezos says about his decision to start Amazon was that when he thought of quitting DE Shaw, he was at an investment bank doing extremely well. The owner, Mr. Shaw, came and talked to him and said, "You're such a bright guy." And Jeff said, "Look, you know what? I want to start this business," and so on. He said, "Look, you can start. It's a great time to be an internet businessman, but you have such a phenomenal career. For someone else, I would have said, yeah, go start a business, but you have such a great career in D Shaw." So he said, "Look, when I don't want to tell my grandchildren that when this internet thing was happening, I was, I did not pay attention. I did not try this out." So his thing was about minimizing regret.
Minimizing regret.
Exactly. So it was in some ways for me it was regret minimization because this is something was going on. I wanted to give it a shot. So we started Fractal, and it was on a whim. And to the others who want to start a business, I will say that don't be in a rush to start a business because the odds of succeeding in a business are very low. I would say 2%. Uh,
Right.
Only 2 out of 100 companies survive the first 10 years, and half
Right.
the companies don't even survive for the first 2 years. So it's not an easy journey. It's filled with lots of ups and downs and emotional upheavals and so on. But when an idea has taken hold of you, when you feel like I can't live one extra day without starting a business and I'm wasting every day that I'm living that I haven't started, that's the time I think you're really ready. And that's the time that energy, that kind of energy will help you in navigating some of the highs and lows of entrepreneurship that you'll experience.
No, absolutely. I think in my career where I've looked at so many startups and the journeys of the founders, it's very hard. Like it is super hard. And if you're thinking that, oh, this is the path and I'll follow it and be easy, I don't think it's like that. It's always worse than you think. I think I've realized that. The other point which you make, which is an interesting one, and I have a slightly different view on the specific Jeff Bezos example. Um, I think he's so smart. He created a very sound logic to explain why he became an entrepreneur. And I think he would have been an entrepreneur regardless of regret minimization or not. So that's just my view. I just think that framework is just supporting what he would have done anyway.
Aviral, you,
Um,
you bring up a very good point because, in general, when you think of decisions, and I'm a big sucker for decision theory because that's
mm,
what Fractal does, powering decisions. So I've done a lot of research, read hundreds of books on this topic. But in
right.
general, we always reach the decision first and we explain later. We don't.
Exactly.
We always think it's analysis
Exactly.
followed by decision is actually
Yeah,
decision followed by justification.
absolutely.
So it cannot
Absolutely.
happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because I see a lot of, like you mentioned it, and I see a lot of people saying, oh, I want to do this because I want to minimize regret. I'm like, I don't think Jeff Bezos thought like that. He just did it. And he's like, oh, what did I do? I minimized regret. So I mean, just my view.
You end up doing things. You end up doing things, and then you find a nice way to connect the dots. I think even Steve
Exactly,
Jobs said that, right? You
exactly,
you can only connect
exactly.
the dots looking backwards. You can't
Correct,
connect it forward. It's happening in your head. You made the decision, and then somehow it clicked that okay, this is probably what was going on, because you really don't
correct,
have, you don't fully understand the all the processes that are happening in your brain, because 99% of it is below the conscious layer.
correct. No, absolutely. And I think decision making. You mentioned that psychology is something that fascinates you. I think decision making is so complicated. Um, and I have like some theories. I'll just mention one more. I also think frameworks are very useful when there are enough stakeholders in the mix, which is how to operate an organization, the levers, etc. Frameworks are useless in 0 to 1 is also my view, right? It's just hustle and effort, right? No, so when a founder comes and they're starting a company, they're like, what framework should I have to start? There's never a framework. I think they're always useful when the company is in its larger scale for someone who's like a manager there, or if it is large enough. I also think that frameworks are useful in those situations. More
Yeah.
predictable, less chaos.
Yeah, it's a bunch of. I think you run experiments because you don't know where you will
Correct.
land up. You
Right.
initially, if you can run very quick experiments and find where the suction is, right? You have to find the
Right.
suction, and once you find the
Right.
suction, you're at least on your way. You may not reach
Right.
the end goal, but at least you got
Right.
started.
Right.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think great segue into how did you find it for Fractal, right? Like, how did you establish that this would be your offering? I know the company has evolved from what it started with and what it is today. Can you talk about the early days as well as the evolution? How did you discover that, hey, this doesn't work, probably do something else?
Yeah, so this all started on August 15th, 1999, on India's Independence Day. It also happens to be my friend Nikhil's birthday. So
Okay,
we were actually sitting at a McDonald's in in Bandra in Mumbai.
right.
This was one of those
Upscale at that time, I'm sure.
upscale, exactly. So we were having this little meal, and I said, Nikhil, I'm quitting. I'm going to quit by the turn of the millennium. I'm quitting this and starting a business. I had no idea where it came from. It just popped in my head. I said it, and once I said it, I started believing in it and started working towards it. And I collected a little team around me, lots of classmates, etc. Our big problem was that we didn't know what we will do. We had
Okay,
entrepreneurial energy. We didn't have any
right.
direction. So
Hmm.
after doing a lot of soul searching, we actually quit our jobs even without having a clear idea of what we will start. And the first couple of weeks, we sort of converged on the idea that we will help consumers make better buying decisions. Let's say you're buying a TV, you're buying a cell phone, you're buying white goods in general. We would give you the best recommendation based on all the products that are available, and based on your preferences, we'll match you to your products. And that's what we created, these recommendation systems for consumers to make these choices, including reviews, etc. So this was a really good idea back in the day. There were quite a few funded companies in the US which were sort of loosely around this idea, not exactly our idea. And then when we launched the website, people loved it. People started using it. But we realized very early on that this is not going anywhere, because .com crash had happened. There was no funding available. There was no revenue model. And it would have
Right.
taken us a long time to get anywhere close. So that's the time we decided, okay, what's the second best thing we can do in our lives? And then we sent out a little team to investigate this. And after doing a lot of soul searching, we said, I'm a big believer in mathematics. And during my engineering days, I also figured out that I love psychology. And I
Hmm.
actually loved psychology courses more than I did loved my engineering courses, even in engineering. So I decided that, okay, where can this lead us? And then math plus psychology meant, let's predict consumer behavior using data, using mathematical models.
Hmm.
So analytics was born, so to speak, in our heads. It was not really called an analytics industry back then. There were no other companies like us. So first thing we did was we went to ICICI, and which was my previous employer. I had worked for
Right.
them for a year.
And this is when? Like, when did
This
you
is
go to
year
them?
2000, end of 2000. Okay.
End of 2000. Okay.
So ICICI,
Like a year after you had the epiphany that, hey, I'm going to be a businessman.
exactly a year
Okay.
after, I went to ICICI, and then there was, the ICICI had launched something called the Personal Financial Services business, essentially retail business. They called it PFS back then. It was
Right.
Shikha Sharma, who later on became the CEO of Prudential, SS Prudential, and then Axis Bank. She was running it. My classmate and friend was running the business intelligence unit, and they had a scorecard. They wanted to use a scorecard to make decisions around who to give loans to and who not to give loans to, right?
Right.
And so we said we'll use a mathematical model. We'll use all your past lending data to give you some prediction on who will pay the loans and who will not pay the loans. And
Right.
they wanted to use that to create a 30-minute loan product. So you could walk into a store, buy a television, get out without having paid anything, take a loan and get the television home. That was the idea. So we set up the whole contraption. It was powered by Fractal's risk model. So that's when we realized that, oh my God, this is so cool, right? It's got all the math that you want. It's got consumer behavior because you're trying to predict who's going to do what. This was
Right.
great. So that was where we found some suction. The second place we found suction was with Unilever, Hindustan Unilever, which was
Right.
seeing this recessionary pattern in 2001. And they said, can you really track how consumers are behaving, how their behavior is changing during a recessionary time? Are they reducing the frequency? Are they downgrading the quality of the product? Are they becoming more promotion sensitive? So we built those stuff. And it was like really it was really intoxicating because this deadly combination of math plus human behavior, we were hooked. And this became the place where we kept building the business. I mean, analytics became AI, but this is what we've been doing for the last 20 years since then.
Amazing. And two big clients. So I have a couple of questions before Mazin jumps in. The first one is, when we had spoken to Razor-based founders, and I've seen this pattern with multiple early stage companies. They think that the big client will make or break them. Many times the ones who escape the big clients do really well, especially if they have to build a scalable product. So Harshil mentioned that Flipkart was very interested in using Razorpay, but if you would have worked with Razorpay, then we would have probably been dead. We would have become their arm or something. We would have never scaled. And in your example, you've taken like these huge clients. They would be massive in comparison to you, but they helped you take off. Any thoughts on like choosing your first few clients, especially if you're like a B2B company?
I mean, it's difficult to choose your clients when you're very, very small.
Of course.
So you get what you get, right? And then
Right.
you have to work and build around it. I agree with this idea that client concentration is risky. If you have a very large client, then your entire existence is under question.
Dependent on them.
Yes. And then you move according to where the client wants you to move, and it could become dangerous. We were in that
Right.
position a number of times. But,
Okay.
good thing is that our largest client kept changing. So at one point of time, Visa was one of the largest clients. It was 65% of our business. Another time, P&G became our largest client. It was 42% of our business. But, over time, gradually, we built a diversified business. I think your ability to win new business is super critical here. So never let the only client that you have or a couple of clients that you have completely control you. As long as you can get new business regularly, you can diversify it over time. You do want to grow and maximize your value with the big client that you have. But Fractal's general focus has always been very big clients. So we always are in a position where all the clients we serve are at least 100 times our size, if not more.
Right.
So we have to be humble. But it's worked very well for us because we've been able to go steadily acquire new business, new clients, and keep learning from them.
Understand. And I think the other point I was making, and is related to my second question, is how did you productize some of your workflows so that you scaled it? If you work with one client, there's always a tendency to be services like, but you've obviously not done that. So if you can talk about how you productize it, as well as how would you describe Fractal today? What would you say you do?
See, Fractal powers human decisions. Really, our mission is to power every human decision. Just imagine companies make so many decisions every single day and so much data is flowing through their systems. Every time a consumer buys a product, somebody clicks on their website, all that data is getting collected and they're making all these decisions. There is a link missing between the two, right? That data can inform your decisions. You can be much more responsive to the data that is coming up, and you can make better decisions. Let's say how to invest your marketing dollars, how to get more personalized for your consumers, how to increase your operational efficiency, how to build new products. You can do all of these decisions in a significantly better way if you can leverage the data that you have. Right? So that's
Right.
what Fractal does. Like, for example, when one of the largest software companies in the world launched their first hardware device, they were spending $1 billion on marketing that device. $1 billion. And so
Wow.
Fractal basically worked with them to decide where that $1 billion is going to be spent in a strategic way so that they can maximize the success of this new hardware device, which is a new thing for them. They had multiple hardware failures in the past. So this is a big deal, which has become very successful for them. So these kinds of decisions we power with data. Right, so that's the kind of business that we build. And what we have done in terms of building knowledge is that the problems seem to be very, very familiar across companies. The same set of problems come in. So after doing a few of these, you can actually build very sophisticated products, very sophisticated algorithms, and very sophisticated set of things that can accelerate your journey with any single client. That's how we've built it, and we've spent 12 to 15% of our revenues on R&D for the last 10, 12 years, which also meant that we could productize the interesting ideas that we were either discovering in our client situations or coming up with it on our own.
I understand.
I mean, you spoke about the evolution from analytics to AI with Fractal over the years. It's essentially the same theme of data and human psychology. Would love to hear a bit more about that evolution. How the business has grown, how the types of problems that you're solving have changed.
So if you think about the AI industry, pre-2010, I would sort of characterize this as the cottage industry phase of the industry, in the sense that there was obviously a lot of analytics being performed. We were doing a lot of good work, but it was like you would take data, solve a specific problem, try to implement it. It used to go in that manner. Around 2010, what we started seeing was that AI techniques started emerging. So before this, all of these were statistical techniques. You had some machine learning techniques, but mostly statistical algorithms like logistic regression, linear regression, those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. But back in the 90s, some of these scientists such as Geoffrey Hinton and others had built neural networks. They became unfashionable. But around 2010, some of these IBM, Microsoft, Googles of the world, they started seeing some very good results from that, especially in speech recognition very early on in 2009, and then image recognition, then natural language processing, and so on. So around 2010, we started seeing the big AI native companies like Google or Amazon and Netflix, etc., started leveraging deep learning in a very significant way. And we started seeing that some of our very advanced clients would start working with us on, let's say, more industrial AI. Now we are talking of algorithms and technology coming very together and operating at scale. Think of when you do a Google search, you get a result in 0.22 seconds. It's incredibly good results in incredibly fast pace. Or when you're doing Netflix, the recommendations are popping up every few. It's just very quickly responds to your new likes and dislikes and gives you the right recommendations. These are happening at internet scale at millions and millions of users in fraction of a second, because these algorithms are learning and developing and deploying them at internet scale in real time. So that started happening around 2010 to 2015, which with AI native companies. Around 2015, what we saw was the big sort of Fortune 100 companies, slightly more older companies, let's say companies that are 100 years old, 200 years old, but very successful companies, started looking at this and saying that this is a big weapon. Data is a strategic advantage, right? That became a conversation in 2014, 2015. Many of the public company boards would ask their CEOs to come and make a presentation on how this company is strategically amassing better data and how it's using algorithms. So we saw our Fortune 100 type of companies starting to use AI in a big way. And around 2020, the floodgates opened. Around COVID, everybody realized that this is the new way of doing things. So AI is taken off. So that's the evolution I've seen in terms of the AI industry. And Fractal has been sort of neck and neck or one step ahead of this entire evolution as well. So the big evolutionary points are engineering and AI have come together, right? So these are happening at much more at scale than ever before, right? It's become much more all pervasive, and you're looking at augmenting human intelligence, but also automating a bunch of sort of things that human beings shouldn't be doing. So those are all the things that have happened in the last 4-5 years.
Oh, fascinating and curious. How did you guys manage to stay ahead of the competition? Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's getting into it. Of course, a lot more people trying to do it as well. So
I think one is that you have to have a long-term view of the business. I think that's one thing that I've always really liked about Jeff Bezos. I mean, I'm a big fan of Jeff Bezos, as you're probably already figuring out. One of the things he says in a Charlie Rose interview in 2009, when Charlie Rose asked him, what is your true differentiators as a company? You're yet another e-commerce company. Why can't another company come and eat your lunch? So Jeff Bezos says, look, yes, it's true. Other people can do what we do, but in two ways, we are very different. One thing he says is we are truly customer-centric. In other words, he says, not only do we sort of treat customers very well and be responsive to them, we also invent and invest on their behalf. So if you're building a Kindle, it's because we think that this is how the reading experience should be. Nobody asked us for a Kindle. We are inventing on our customers' behalf. So that's what he said. And the second thing he said was, we take a long-term view of the business. It's day one in the life of Amazon, and we want to build a company that is there for the next 100 years, and we will take a 7-year view on any investment. It's not as if we will just continue investing behind what is failing. We'll pivot, but the ones we have conviction on, we can take a 7-year long view on it. So we have sort of followed a similar sort of playbook. One is that to be truly client-centric, we always want to do what's best for the client and invent and invest on their behalf. And second is take a longer-term view. And here that means how much we invest in R&D, 12 to 15% in R&D, how much we invest in our people, and take a very long-term view of our people, which means really hire very smart people and not just experienced people, because smart people over time become very experienced and very good. But if you only hire experienced people who are not smart, they don't really grow that much. So hire smart people who can learn. And secondly, invest in their learning and growth by creating a Fractal Academy so that they are continuously learning. So when you have very smart people in a very good culture, which values the long term, and then they are client-centric and inventing on behalf of the clients, we can sort of be responsive and be a step ahead of where clients are.
When you say you should be client-centric like Amazon, I think that's easy for people to relate to in the consumer sense. But what does it mean for you to be client-centric in your business, in the enterprise world?
It's a fantastic question. First thing I'll say is this is a funny thing, because when we were actually not a client-centric business, because I know what it is not to be client-centric. So there was a time in our business where we thought we were very client-centric, because we had on our walls, we said client value creation is one of our values. So now that we have it on the wall, obviously we'll be client-centric, but we were not. And one person called Srikanth Velamakanni, he used to be the CEO of one of Marico's businesses. He had just left them. I had found him as a coach. So he came in, we did a couple of sessions. Then he did the tour of the office, spent a couple of days in our office. And he comes to me and says, Srikanth, you are the most client and unfriendly company I've ever met. And I'm shocked, angry. And I'm like, no way, Srikanth, we know what it is to be client-centric. Look, we do such amazing work for our clients. What are you talking about? This is absolutely wrong. And then he says, look, I have spent some time in your office, and there are no client conversations. You guys are obsessed with your craft, analytics and AI. You love the craft of analytics. You don't understand what it is to be client-centric. So that was a moment of truth for me. And that's the penny dropped. And we all got together as an exec team, and we said, we got to get better. And then we really pivoted. And what we did do, first thing we said is that for 1 year, we will not sell anything to anybody. We said we'll stop all sales. Wow. If client-centric means just serve the existing clients better, don't sell anything. Okay. We
How
said
did your investors react to that?
That was the year we grew the most. That is the funny thing is that, right? Our growth was the highest in that year. Second thing we did was we actually told ourselves that we'll never criticize our clients. No criticism permitted. And we started measuring what was called as Net Promoter Score. What are clients thinking about us, and really listening deeply to their feedback. And then we started doing these quarterly, monthly reviews with the clients, where we would hear them, what is their experience of working with us. And once the leadership started behaving and investing in clients and working with clients, and people thought this NPS starts to make a difference, is an important ingredient of how we assess our performance. Every NPS form would come to us and we look at it and we'll celebrate or sort of critique ourselves. So slowly and surely we became client-centric. One of the elements of client-centricity that I've not talked about is also making sure that the clients are successful. So you can do your analytics and get away, but if they're not using it, if they're not driving success in their organization, if the stakeholder who invested in you, if she or he is not succeeding and not getting promoted in the organization, then you're not done your job. So truly making your results subservient to your client's results, that is the biggest change. It involves even working with the competitors. So we were earlier very much competitive focused. We would say, why should we work with competitors? But now we don't care. We'd say, okay, if you have to work with a competitor to drive better results for you, we'll do it, because it's all about driving your results. And eventually our results will follow yours.
That's an incredible insight, and it's counterintuitive and amazing how you got to it. Right? I'm sure you've learned a lot from some of those NPS surveys and the feedback you got from clients. But curious, as we've talked about this evolution, how has your role as a CEO changed over 20 years?
I've always been the guy who's, sort of evolved with the business, right? So started with, I was the best sales guy for Fractal. I was a founder who could sell at the beginning. I was also the most technical guy at some point of time. I would get into the nitty-gritties of every technique. Because of my math interest, I would get into the algorithms, and I would, at various points of time, I was the best analyst or the best algorithms. There was a situation, I'll tell you. This was working with one of the largest auto lenders in the US. And there was nobody to work on a project. It was very sort of a sophisticated project that came up in 2009. And I decided to work on the project. I wrote all the code. And then when we were on the call to explain all the results to them, I had to pretend to be an analyst because I didn't want them to know that the CEO is the guy who's answering all their questions. So I faked not being a CEO. So I've been that guy too. But over time, what I've realized is that my best use is in looking at the future, like really truly thinking of where the future is. And therefore, I've always been focused on tomorrow and day after tomorrow. I divide everything in Fractal into today, tomorrow, and day after tomorrow. So my colleague and co-founder Pranay, he really focuses on the today. He's big on today. He gets everything right. He's my classmate and co-founder. And he also thinks of to some extent about the tomorrow. I think mostly about day after tomorrow and to some extent about tomorrow. So that's really where I focus on. And that includes culture. I think I also have had laser sharp focus on building the Fractal culture to be relevant for the next 100 years. So those are the two things where I spend most of my time.
And I think one question I had was, very, very interesting conversation. Firstly, I think you answered the unfiltered feedback question with the Marico example. Like you got some really unfiltered feedback that you're not planned for.
I've got more, by the way.
Yeah, so then awesome. We can pick that up as well. But you speak about your co-founder and co-founder dynamics, really important for founding teams. How did you meet? How has that trust played out? How has the dynamics evolved over time?
Yeah, great question. So we went through our struggles because we started with 6 founders, went to 5 almost immediately, and then went to 2 in 2011. So I'll focus on the last 10 years, 11 years of building this company with Pranay. So Pranay and I met at the business school. So we were both in the same class, in the same section. We work on a few projects together. So we really liked each other. And we also prepared for our placements together when we were graduating from business school. And we were both equally disappointed about our placements. So we had really a similar journey. And then we worked for the same two organizations of, ANZ Investment Bank and ICICI Limited. Right? So we worked for the same two organizations. Then we started Fractal together. So I've known Pranay now for, I think, 27 years, more than I've known my wife. So we have a really good relationship. Which essentially means that we totally get each other. We totally predict each other's moves. But there's a tremendous amount of trust in each other as well, which is that I know that he's always going to do the right thing for Fractal, and he's never going to do something that's not good for me. Right? So that kind of trust has been there for me and for him as well. And also there's complementarity. Right? So he's the commercial guy. He's the guy who gets the details. I'm the guy who gets the vision and the big picture and the people. Right? I get the emotions and I get at the big picture, and he gets the details, and he gets the commercial instinct, and he gets the tough. If we had to fire people in the very early phases of Fractal, I would always tell him, please, Pranay, you do the firing, because I was incapable of firing anybody. So we basically have worked this relationship out. And it's been a wonderful partnership over the years. And I would say that I would say two people founding teams are best. And if one person is a CTO and one person is a chief commercial officer, any of you can call yourself a CEO. But if you can play a commercial role and a technology role, I think that seems to be the best combination for driving success. I'm sure you guys have seen more of those successes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I think so. I've done this analysis on unicorn founders, and I'm happy to share that data with you. You'll be surprised with the number of solo founders. So out 100 unicorns I analyzed, factoring for some who are not unicorns anymore, etc. 21 had solo founders. Although the highest was 2, which was 33, and then it was 3, which was 24, and then it just like dropped off. 4, 5, like 5 was 1, 4 was the remaining. So,
once you cross
we've also seen like this.
Once you cross 4 or 5, I think you're guaranteeing lack of success, because
it's unstable.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing I had found was repeat entrepreneurs go in packs. You're very unlikely to find a repeat founder, especially ones who have not had a large outcome, starting a company alone. And I think they probably realize that it's not something they can do by themselves. Obviously, there are some examples of founders who are repeat entrepreneurs and single, but probably because they had a large outcome in the beginning itself. So that was another interesting thing. And I mean, you're right, 2 is the magic number, but it's not rare to find a single founder or a 3-member team.
Absolutely. I've seen that self-awareness is a big thing. And if you're a founder, you have to become self-aware reasonably quickly. There are a lot of non-self-aware founders who have built success as well. So I'm not saying that that's an absolute necessary condition, but it definitely accelerates your success if you know what you're good at and what you're not good at, and therefore find a team that complements you rather than something that looks just like you.
Shifting gears a little bit, you spoke about the role of culture in the organization and your role in kind of promoting the culture. You have offices in Mumbai and in San Francisco. Can you tell us what are some of the things that the two of you do as founders to kind of promote the culture within the company?
And I think just to nuance that, maybe if you could also add the remote / working from anywhere aspect. What do you think about it? How are you managing it?
So to address the remote part of it, we had in 2016 we had come up with the idea that people should be able to work from anywhere. Not that we were encouraging people to work from anywhere all the time, but we wanted people to have the option to work from anywhere. So we built the systems for enabling people to log in from anywhere, even from a smartphone or from a computer, log in from anywhere and be able to do the work. Because there were 10 to 20% of Fractalites who would be either traveling or would be working from home on any given day, even back in 2016, 2017. And this played out really well to our advantage in 2020 when COVID hit, and we could smoothly transition to working from anywhere. I do feel that you can do that for some time, but you can't do it forever. If you want to work out of your parents' basement forever, I think it will limit career outcomes. So that is for sure, and many youngsters actually don't recognize that today. So you sort of, as long as you can come back to recharge yourself, socially recharge yourself in the office, and I think, and if especially people who are young who need this apprenticeship model of learning from others, it makes sense to work out of an office. But otherwise, we do believe that people should have the option to work from anywhere. Somebody's on maternity and then she wants to work from home for the next 3 months or after the maternity, after 6 months, whatever. There's a very smooth, gentle way of bringing someone back to full time to work through these sorts of methods. So it makes sense. So we have to have the option, but it doesn't mean that everyone should exercise the option all the time. That's my view on that. And from a culture standpoint, to answer Mazin's question, we basically, our culture is of client centricity, thinking long term, and creating a trust, sort of an environment of trust, transparency, and freedom for everybody. So we have 4 values that we have, and we sort of live those values. So one of the ways in which we reinforce this is we run a weekly town hall. So which is sort of quite unusual for companies of our scale, which is at 4,500 people. we run a call every week across the globe where we spend 90 minutes, and of that 45 minutes are used to answer questions that people have. We get 20 to 30, maybe even 50 questions in a town hall, and we sort of upvote those questions and we answer as many as possible every single week. And every single week we get another 100 questions. So it's amazing that people do have questions. And the fact that we are transparently answering all these questions, no question is, as long as the question is everybody wants to hear it, we will answer that question regardless of how sensitive that question may be. And we spent 45 minutes doing that in a 90-minute town hall, which kind of creates that transparency. Secondly, we put the same information in front of our people that we present in front of our board, that we present in front of our clients. So you have three key stakeholders, like people, clients, and board, and they see the same material, right? So we don't have to pretend to our clients something and to our people something else and to our board something else. It's the same material. And sometimes in 2 days before our board meeting, I would be presenting that in a town hall because Tuesday, let's say the board meeting on a Thursday. On Tuesday, I would be presenting the same deck to our board, to our fractalites, and telling them that, look, this is what I'm planning to present in our board meeting 2 days from now. So that's the kind of openness and transparency that we have created, which I'm told is very unusual. I mean, it comes naturally to us because I feel like, if people don't know what business they're working on, how can they, feel a sense of ownership of that business? But it's not common. So that's how we create some of these mechanisms. We look at NPS forms, which are every time we have got 400 to 500 in a month we get, right? These kinds of forms that are filled by our clients, telling us where we are doing. Every form individually gets distributed to the leadership team of Fractal. So we read that form and we discuss it in our Teams channel or something like that. So really, everyone knows that client feedback matters, and we will celebrate the goods and we'll critique the bad things, and we'll get better. So that sort of cycle also reinforces the client-centric culture that we have. So these are some mechanisms. I can go on for an hour on this topic, but this is a very important topic.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And wanted to get a couple of your views on two things that are both very hot right now. The first is more technically on AI, and what do you think of generative AI, the whole, I think, much greater adoption of ML as well. How do you think that is changing things? The second, unrelated to this but related to culture, is what's your view on layoffs? What's happening in tech? Do you think it impacts you or changes the way things happen around you?
Yeah. So to first comment on the second question first, I think layoffs, I tend to feel that layoffs done only for short-term boosting of profits is sort of almost like a sort of evil move in my book, because if times are tough, I've seen that people come together nicely and say that, look, we will even take a pay cut to get through the tough times. So I've seen that work really well because it motivates people to do a lot of good work. And even though there will be a few people who come and say, look, why am I taking a pay cut for somebody else? Why don't you fire some people, few people? There'll be a few people, but a vast majority of people really support something like that. So you can, let's say what happened at Twitter a couple of days back, is that needed? I don't know. Maybe this is a way to send a signal or a message to the whole crowd that, look, we need to completely change. This kind of shock treatment was required. But if it's to fuel the ego of one person, then I don't believe that's a good thing. So in general, my preference on layoffs is that it should be something that you should do as a last resort, not as flex your muscles every once in a while. There will be some performance-led people being asked to go, which will happen all the time, we should not confuse that with a general layoff. So that's on the second question. And so what is real? If you can't see look at a picture and think of it as a real anymore, right? It could have been produced by an AI, which will be completely photorealistic at 8K resolution with real human beings, and it would be a fake. So that will happen, and it is happening right now. So there are some pluses and minuses, but frankly, the way AI is progressing and the sort of the acceleration it is seeing, it is very likely that in the next 10 years, almost everything around us will become significantly smarter. And we would not feel any differently because we would say, oh, this is expected. Like we expect our smartphones to be very smart today, unlock with our Face ID or do all kinds of interesting things, translate on the fly, etc., without realizing the amount of AI that's going into making that happen. So it's the same thing will happen in 10 years, but the tech will be even more advanced because of all the new AI techniques that are there.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to investing in a few AI startups who, I think many are building layers over GPT-3. There's this interesting company in the US, I think called Adapt. A lot of the guys and girls who authored the paper on the transformer model, they've ended up starting their companies. They had a very interesting use case, which is, uh, can I use GPT-3 and natural language, speech to text, to be able to tell a software to do whatever it wants, whatever I want, right? Like, for example, you want to run a bunch of Google searches instead of typing them yourself. This tool does it. I think that's quite fascinating. You don't need it changes the paradigm for SaaS. You don't need a help. You don't need customer support. It just plugs into your software and it's able to do a lot of things. So I do think that there are lots of value additions happening there. I also do believe that VCs are having this rebound moment with AI, which is the breakup with Web3. There's so much money that went into it, and now they're like finding the next hot thing. But I still do think that there's a lot of merit in what's happening.
I mean, when as you invest in what I've seen, and this is my advice to all AI entrepreneurs out there, is AI. You can build a very horizontal generic AI platform, and some will be magical things like GPT-3, etc. But the amount of research and the billions of dollars that go into something like that, not every entrepreneur can make that happen. So if you are a sort of scrappy entrepreneur with a couple of $1 million of funding or a few $1 million of funding, and you have to build something, then I would say that work on a use case and work backwards. So define a very narrow problem, and work backwards from that decision and build enough AI to make that happen. So I say user-centric, decision backwards, narrow AI. That's really what works. User-centric as in you really think of what is the user trying to accomplish and help her accomplish that. It's decision backwards as in think of what decisions she's making and work backwards from there. And it is going to be narrowly framed. Don't try to be too much and get it right. That's your MVP. And once you have traction there, then you can start building anything else. Rather than try to be a very all-encompassing, ambitious AI, I think it still will require tons and tons of research and hundreds of millions of dollars of funding. So I would say that not for everyone, that part.
Absolutely. I agree. I think the most evident but very often repeated error is building a solution for nobody, which a lot of founders do because they are also probably able to raise money for it. But I completely agree. I think that's the way to go about it. We've had like a fascinating, wide-ranging conversation. Just a few, couple of closing questions. What's next for Fractal? What are you thinking of in the next 10 years? Because I know you're not looking at a time frame of 2 years only. You've been around for 20 years. So what's next? What does the future look like for you?
So one is we would like to be a public company, which I think we certainly have the scale and the scope of be a public company. In fact, we had it probably for the last 4 years, but we're probably a little late to that party. But we would love to be a public company sometime in the near future. That's one. Second is we are investing significantly in quantum computing, which I think is the next big thing. When you combine quantum computing with machine learning, it is quite game changing because most machine learning problems are very difficult, exponentially hard problems. So when you scale of data and scale of computation increases, it just multiplies to a level where it becomes too expensive or just impossible to run those computations. Quantum can sometimes accelerate the number of computations and do it very cheaply or very efficiently. So there is a huge potential there. So we are working on things like quantum chemistry. So if you look at what DeepMind did with protein folding and giving the 200 million proteins, of those 100 million of those are not, the accuracy is not good enough. It's okay, but it's not good enough. 100 million of them, it's really good, right? So roughly 50%, my sense, right? So what about the rest? Where can we improve the accuracy? You can bring in quantum computing to actually accelerate those results. So we're working on some interesting problems like these, which are in the research lab. Other research items we're working on are in computational neuroscience. So what does the human brain do the 2 seconds before it makes a decision or the 1.5 seconds before it makes a decision, what exactly happens in the brain, and therefore can we understand it so that we can actually help people make the right choices in life, right? Meet their intentions. I want to take my medicines on time. I don't take my medicines on time. I want to exercise every day. I don't exercise every day. So how can we help using neuroscience and AI? Can we, if we can get people to, get their habits straight, etc. So these are some interesting topics that we are working on. So these are things that are in the research lab we think are going to take off. And we have a bunch of products like Qure.ai, which is doing really good in healthcare AI and raised a lot of money independently as a company. We have Theremin, which is doing stock market investments using AI algorithms. We have Crux Intelligence, which is doing some very interesting work in nudging the right information to the right users in the business context. We have Eugenie, which is solving for carbon footprint problems. Right, it measures carbon footprint and helps you reduce carbon footprint from your machines. So you can connect your machines to Eugenie, and Eugenie will tell you what carbon emissions are happening and how to reduce it. So we think we can play an important role using AI. So we have a lot of these interesting products. We've got a great business to run. So looking forward to what happens next on that.
Awesome. And I'm particularly excited with the quantum computing bit. I actually studied engineering physics when I was in college. My dream is to invest in a company that does quantum computing. I don't know if it will happen in the next 5 years, but hopefully in the 10, 20 years it will. And just to close out, what's one piece of unfiltered feedback you've got? I know you mentioned there's so much, and we had the Mariko example, but one that you would have to choose.
Okay, I'll give you one more. Maybe I may have two more. Let's see. This was a few years back when Fractal had not raised any institutional round of funding. So we had a guy who came, very famous VC investor who also happened to be a few years senior to me from college. He and his American colleagues came to our office to, sort of evaluate Fractal for investment. So he spent the whole day, and then he basically said, "Hey, we really like your business. This is an interesting business, but we won't be able to invest in you." I said, "Why?" He says, "We like the business, but we don't like you." So, so he said, he was kind of a very direct guy. And he said, "We don't think you can build this business, and we don't think you can scale this business. So therefore, we are going to not invest in your business." So it was a very brutal feedback. I was quite shaken, frankly. And then, I decided what to do with it. So I am kind of a guy who takes feedback I'm very sensitive to feedback. So I take feedback very strongly. So I took it. It really affected me, but I also process it and get better. So that's my quality, is that I get feedback. I violently resist it initially. I struggle with it. Eventually I incorporate it and get better. So next day I spoke with my executive team and told them this is what happened. I had to come clean and tell them in a vulnerable way that, look, they said I can't scale this company. So otherwise they like the business. So I want to tell them that, look, there's nothing wrong with the business. Something is wrong with me. But you know what? We'll get better. So that helped me in actually building a better company. Eventually, I think I got better in terms of scaling the company, and I think Fractal is better off. Thankfully, it didn't have, it didn't require me to leave the company. I've managed to grow. So that's one thing I've learned over the years, is that you can grow a business when you can grow yourself. You have to grow in order to grow the business. If you don't grow, you can't grow your business.
Amazing. I think a very, very good end. Thank you so much, Srikanth, for the chat. Loved the conversation. I think super interesting, super fun, and super enriching.
Great to meet you guys. Aviral, Mazin, great to be here. See you soon.